give everyone a few minutes to join us, and welcome to the Veloz webinar this morning. We'll get started in just about a minute or so when we get our participants loaded in. Great, we'll get started now. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Veloz webinar, Autonomous and Electric, Twins or Sisters? I know you're all dying to know. Today, we are placing all of your microphones on mute to minimize feedback, and we'll be answering audience questions after the presentations and the facilitated Q&A, given if we have time for that, so we hope we do. Feel free to ask any question during the webinar using the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar. I want to note that we are recording the webinar and we will be posting the recording to the Veloz website in the next few days. My name is Lisa Kilodikis. I'm the programs director here at Veloz. And before I introduce our moderator and our speakers, I'd like to give you a little bit of background about Veloz. Veloz is a public-private nonprofit made up of almost 40 member organizations, including automakers, utilities, state and local government, third-party charging providers, transportation network companies, nonprofits, and others. As you can see from this slide and the logos on the slide, that Veloz's membership is broad, diverse, and growing. Veloz aims to inspire all Californians to drive electric through its statewide awareness campaign, Electric for All summits, webinars, and other programs. Our goal is to continue to engage new entities and organizations. So if you're not a member, we invite you to join us. You can visit our Join Us page on our website to learn more. Veloz also produces an electric car sales dashboard quarterly that we publish on our website. Our sales dashboard includes California and United States electric vehicle sales, the number of makes and models in California, the number of EV chargers, and hydrogen stations. This slide shows the growing sales through Q2 of 2021. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Muni Krishna, our Strategic Partnerships Director, to kick off the webinar, introduce our speakers, and dive into the conversation. So Muni, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. With the rise of electric vehicles, so have we seen the advancement of autonomous technology in the vehicle marketplace. Today's webinar will focus on the relationship between the two technologies and discuss the advancements as they are related to one another. Next slide. Please join me in welcoming our speakers today. From Cruise, Head of Global Government Affairs, Prashanthi Raman. From Zoox, Head of Corporate and Regulatory Affairs, Bert Kaufman. From the California DMV, Chief of Autonomous Vehicles Branch, Mikel Agosta. And from UC Davis, Policy Director, Molly D'Agostino. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Prashanthi, you're up.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Great. Good morning, or depending on where you are, might be good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here today again, Prashanthi Raman. I am Head of Global Government Affairs at Cruise, and I'm very excited to be here today, not only because many of my co-panelists are people I talk to very often, so always excited to see their faces, but also because talking about autonomous and electric vehicles is synonymous with Cruise. So let me tell you a little bit about Cruise. Cruise is a San Francisco-based company with the mission to build the world's most advanced self-driving vehicles to safely connect people with the places, things, and experiences they care about. We were founded in 2013 with the belief at Cruise that the future is autonomous, self-driving, fully electric, and far more accessible with the experience focused around the consumer instead of the driver. Apparently have a little bit of a hiccup on my slide, so I apologize for that. At Cruise, safety is of course paramount to us, but sustainability is foundational to what we do as well. Transportation is the largest source of emissions in the US at 28%. In California alone, transportation accounts for over 40% of total emissions, 72% of which come from light duty passenger vehicles. EVs can lower greenhouse gas emissions by 83% versus gas-powered cars, and when powered by renewables, brings us to nearly 100%. But despite progress in driving adoption, we still have a long way to go. Battery EVs represent just 1.6% of all vehicles registered in San Francisco and 0.8% in the state of California. And that is why Cruise is committed to decarbonizing transportation with 100% of investment in clean energy, like installing one of the largest EV charging stations in North America, right in our hometown of San Francisco. And knowing that we accounted for 80% of zero emission AV miles in California in 2020, calling on our fellow AV companies to join us in a Clean Mile Challenge to adopt zero emission fleets. Cruise has been charging our fleet with emission-free solar power since 2020 by buying renewable energy credits on the open market. But we realized that there was more we could do to expand the benefits of our fleet to more communities today, not just those in cities like San Francisco likely to experience Cruise first. So I'm excited to share that starting this spring, Cruise began sourcing those renewable energy credits directly from farms in the Central Valley that generate their own solar power. Through Farm to Fleet, we've been able to intentionally source our renewable power from farms like Sundale, a third-generation vineyard outside of Tulare, and Moonlit, a family-owned fruit orchard near Fresno. So to be clear, every mile we now drive in California goes directly to benefit these farmers by buying their renewable power, creating a tangible link between California's agricultural communities and Cruise, even as our AVs charge hundreds of miles away. And we think that's pretty powerful. So we're so excited for opportunities like Farm to Fleet that allow us to deeply integrate sustainability into our business strategy, and doing so in a way that scales with the growth of our service. Cruise is proud to be a founding partner in Emission Zero, a coalition of leading environmental science, labor, and autonomous vehicle groups in support of bills like California's SB 500, which requires all AVs to be EVs by a certain date. We are united in our vision that the future of transportation is safer, cleaner, and can create new jobs for Californians. So partnering with some of the largest OEMs out there, GM and Honda, this is the Cruise Origin. It was unveiled last January, and it represents an opportunity to redesign mobility from the ground up, to break from this 20th century model of human-driven single occupant and internal combustion. And it's the Origin, by contrast, is purpose-built, fully autonomous, fully electric, and shared. It'll operate on an Ultium battery, which will be the world's first million-mile battery. We're very excited that it will power its fleet with 100%, of course, we talked about 100% renewable energy, and the Origin can seat up to 6. And so you really get a sense of its impact. So we're breaking down the tech divide with our electrification priorities and allowing access to such vehicles at a lower cost for all communities. But fundamentally at Cruise, our ability to integrate into the communities and use our technology for good is the fiber that runs through the organization. And that's why we believe real innovation is zero emission. So thank you so much. And I look forward to the rest of the discussion and hearing from my co-panelists.
Thank you so much, Prashanthi. Those were great remarks and exciting to hear what Cruise has been up to. Bert, you're up next.
Terrific, Mooney, thank you. And Prashanthi, excellent presentation. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. As Mooney said, Bert Kaufman, I'm head of corporate and regulatory affairs at Zoox. And let's see, I think you are able to see my presentation. If I get great, excellent. All right, so autonomous and electric, twins or sisters, here we go. So Zoox is a California-based company. We got going in 2014 on the grounds of the Stanford Linear Accelerator. And this was the initial slide that our co-founders used in some of their initial pitches to VCs. They were getting funded. And it really does let us take a step back to look at where we've come from. And so the prevailing view is just as the internal combustion engine took us out of the age of the horse and carriage and into the era of the automobile, we strongly believe that AI and robotics will take us out of the era of the automobile and into what comes next, and that is the autonomous vehicle. Autonomous mobility is not an incremental change when done completely. It is a revolutionary departure from the age of the car. And today, as Prashanthi said, we're used to a model of individually owned gas-powered human-driven vehicles. And that model is broken. So we believe that the full realization of autonomous technology for mobility requires three elements. And so at Zoox, we're building a new vehicle architecture designed from the ground up that's optimized for three things: zero emissions, sharing, and full autonomy. So here's a look at the well-to-wheel greenhouse gas emissions from cars. You see on your screen, the first black bar represents what we see today from today's ICE cars. The next bar shows us what a Prius gets us, and it cuts emissions in half, which is a pretty good start. The third bar shows us what the California battery electric vehicle mix looks like, another factor of 2 improvement. But ultimately, what we are aiming for is a fleet powered by renewables, and this will get us another order of magnitude improvement. And so it's pretty clear that we need to do this. But then the question is it enough for everyone to go out and buy themselves an EV? And we would argue that the answer is no. In fact, in the US, we own too many cars and then leave them sitting around doing nothing. They're only used for 4% of their lives and spend 96% of the time taking up space and depreciating. So in general, when you're not using your car, nobody else is. And believe it or not, making a conventional car, even an electric one, creates about as much carbon pollution as driving it over its useful life. And on top of that, most of the vehicle miles traveled across the US involve just one single occupant. And so making cars that do nothing for 96% of the time is bad for the environment, and it's not a great business. So instead of more than 2 cars per family parked most of the time, through our purpose-built vehicle and our fleet, we'll be able to meet cities' transportation needs with way fewer vehicles. Zoox's vehicle is designed for sharing. When you're not using it, somebody else likely is. And we think that this is a much better use of resources. We're not wasting value space in cities by adding more parked cars or contributing to the 1/3 of traffic that's drivers looking for a parking spot. And at Zoox, our vehicles will have a bit that's so big that we can drive from before sunup to after people go to bed and serve up to hundreds of people per day per vehicle without having to recharge. So our battery will be bigger than any cars in the world. And this may sound like a nice to have feature, but actually it's a lot of the other challenges, like the fact that vehicles with smaller batteries will need to drive out of service to recharge, which creates more congestion and wasted miles. And not only that, they will need to charge during peak energy usage instead of at night when demand for both rides and energy is lower. And so it turns out that if you wanted to sell your car and switch to using Uber and Lyft for point-to-point mobility in the Bay Area, it would cost you about $20,000 a year. And that's obviously expensive for most people. And so we have discussed both electric vehicles and sharing. And so is the solution for everybody to go out and use electric Uber and Lyfts, and for all of their drivers to switch to electric vehicles? And still, because it's so expensive, we think the answer is no. So it's about twice as expensive as owning your own vehicle. And unsurprisingly, most people can't afford to pay that. So the only way to really solve this at scale is through fully autonomous vehicles. And so that's basically how we think about the problem at Zoox. And again, looking forward to the discussion and your questions. And I think back over to Mooney.
Thank you so much, Bird. It's exciting to hear your origin story and how far you've come. Next up on the panel is Miguel Acosta from the California DMV.
Okay, well, again, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today at this forum. And I'm going to transition a little bit and give a overview of our autonomous vehicles program here in the state of California, which Cruise and Zoox are a part of. And so I just wanted to start by saying there's kind of an important distinction between the federal government's role and the role of the state here at the DMV. So the federal government's role is to ensure the safety of vehicles, and they do that through issuing federal motor vehicle safety standards, whereas here in the state of California, we're responsible for ensuring the safe operation of vehicles on public roads, and we do that through the California Vehicle Code. So just a quick overview of the regulatory landscape here in the state. Back in 2012, Senate Bill 1298 authorized the DMV to start regulating autonomous vehicle operations. And in 2014, we issued our first set of regulations governing autonomous vehicle testing. And that is with a safety driver behind the wheel to be able to test anywhere on California public roadways. Some of the requirements associated with that, their companies needed to provide evidence of a $5 million of insurance. We would vet all of the safety drivers through checking their driver license records to ensure that they're safe drivers. They don't have any DUIs or let's say reckless driving convictions. And then we would mark all of the vehicle registration records to ensure that the titles reflect the autonomous test vehicles. In addition, the manufacturers have to report to us any kind of collision that occurs while testing on public roads within 10 days. And at the end of each year, the manufacturers have to provide us with information related to the disengagement of the technology. By disengagement, we mean any time that the autonomous technology transfers control back to the safety driver, the companies have to describe the facts associated with that. And we publish all of that data since 2015 on our website. I believe we're one of the only jurisdictions that provides that. And then in 2018, we issued a second set of regulations that allowed for companies to test without a safety driver on California public roads. And we also ushered in the ability for companies to deploy their autonomous technology. By deploy, we mean make it commercially available, make it available for the public. And then in 2019, our third set of regulations allowing for autonomous deliveries. So I wanted to provide this levels of automation because I think it's important to define what we say in the state as autonomous vehicles. We refer to autonomous vehicles as vehicles that have the capability of performing the dynamic driving task at levels, SAE levels 3 through 5. So anything lower than that, when we're talking 2 or ADAS type technologies, are not currently regulated by the state of California as autonomous vehicles. So when we're talking about these companies, it's again 3 through 4 to all the way to 5 in the future. Okay, so just quickly talking about the program overview, we have 53 manufacturers who are authorized to test with a safety driver. So the majority of our manufacturers are in this category. We have a subset of manufacturers who have been authorized to test without a safety driver. And so some of the requirements associated with getting that particular permit is the manufacturers have to describe to us their operational design domain, where they plan to be testing in the state of California. And they have to notify the local authorities in that jurisdiction. And then they have to provide what we call a law enforcement interaction plan, describing to local law enforcement and our California Highway Patrol how they are going to be interacting with these vehicles on the roadway. And then currently, as of today, we have one manufacturer that has been approved to deploy their technology on California public roads. So in terms of the number of the fleet size, we have a little over 1,200 active autonomous vehicles that are testing primarily in the Bay Area. We do have companies working in Southern California, Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and San Diego. And the number of test drivers that we have, a little bit over 3,500. And then since the inception of the program, a little over 300 collisions have been reported to the department. And I have to qualify that by saying many of the collisions that we've seen are minor collisions occurring where it's actually the human driver kind of rear-ending the AV or colliding with the AV. And then all of the AVs on the public roads have accumulated about 8.5 million autonomous miles driven. And then here's a list of some of the companies that we have. You can see there's a variety here. Our panel members are located on here as well. And then finally, I wanted to kind of turn towards a trend, and I think Bert and Prashanthi were mentioning it. We've seen a change kind of in the fleet for the registered vehicles, the autonomous vehicles that we have authorized to test on public roads and to deploy. Overwhelmingly, the electric and hybrid vehicles make up the majority of the fleet. We're seeing less and less vehicles that are gas-powered vehicles. So this is a trend we're continuing to monitor. And based on what the manufacturers are describing, this trend seems to continue. So I know that was a very quick overview, but my contact information is here, and looking forward to further discussions as the forum moves on. Thank you.
Thanks, Miguel. It's always really good to understand the regulatory environment surrounding AVs, and that was a great presentation. Next up is Molly from UC Davis.
Hi, thanks so much for having me as well. And yeah, so I am going to not have slides, so just stay with me here. First of all, my name is Molly Cohen-D'Agostino. I'm the policy director at the UC Davis Policy Institute, where I focus on the three revolutions: shared, electric, and automated vehicles. I have three things I want to cover in my remarks. First, I want to focus on the importance of sort of why we're having this conversation about why to electrify AVs. And next, we'll look at the state of the industry, which of course Miguel covered quite a bit. And then last, I'll just point out what I think is important in terms of policy priorities. And I think the policy priorities are sort of the most exciting thing, but I want to sort of begin with also mentioning some of the research findings so we're all aware. So what's the big deal about electrifying AVs? I'll say this, the earliest automated vehicle research made some simple assumptions. Basically, the idea is that if you reduce the travel time burden by making driving tasks less burdensome, you reduce the time cost of travel, and as a result of just basic supply and demand, you'll see more travel. Early research, early modeling used some proxies like your time value of time you spend in the train or the bus as a sort of proxy for understanding how we can estimate time values of people using automated vehicles. And with that, there was a lot of research studies that emerged to try to think through sort of what this type of increased demand, travel demand would look like. One study looked at partially automated vehicles and noticed a 15 to 20% increase amongst drivers, Tesla drivers who have automated features and those who do not. The group that had automated features drove slightly more. Another study gave folks chauffeurs for a week, comparing their travel time before receiving the chauffeur and after. And again, we saw large increases, the largest increases being amongst the retirees and children who likely aren't driving or aren't comfortable driving in many cases. The last research I'll mention was a statewide modeling exercise led by Giovanni Tritella, which was focused on basically understanding what the full scale impacts of AVs will be in the state. And really, it's not conclusive. The range there's a huge range of outcomes with no road pricing strategies are implemented, we'll see somewhere between 5% and 42% of increased VMT or vehicle miles traveled. But if some road pricing strategies are implemented, so if policies are implemented to address this demand, meaning road user charges or congestion charges, you could see a smaller range of between 7% increase or even up to 20% decrease in overall VMT. So policy plays a huge role, and we'll come to that. So next, I'll turn to sort of like do we even need policy? What is the industry doing? Miguel covered it and mentioned the fact that about half of testing right now is occurring with electric vehicles. Sure, that's good, right? That's pretty good. The AV industry is forward-looking, and we know that many of the companies have pledged to electrify. We could only find 2 out of all the companies that we researched, all of those 53 companies that Miguel mentioned, that have voiced publicly that they plan to initially deploy using gas-powered vehicles, Argo, AI, and Voyage. But there may be others. It's difficult to assess sort of the, and a lot of companies are operating are focusing on ADS software or hardware and appear pretty agnostic about their vehicle fuel train. They just are modding out existing vehicles and looking for vehicles that would work well for their efforts. So, so I think there's a lot of unknowns within the existing vehicle fleets, given that about half are testing with electric. That is a good sign, but it's not, you know, certainly given the fact that these are expected to be high mileage vehicles, I think we can do better than that. So, so I'll come to policy last. And so I think in terms of electrifying AVs, we will need policy because, you know, commitments from you know, some of the panelists on this call are deeply committed to electrifying their AV fleets, but that's not true of the full industry. And I think we need policy to assure that these high mileage vehicles are electrified. So there's some ways we could do it. You know, fortunately, AVs that are going to be operated in shared passenger fleets like the Zoox or the Cruise model, where they're going to be used for passenger taxis, are likely to, are already governed by the Clean Mile Standard, the California Clean Mile Standard, which will require that all shared fleets being used in TNC or Transportation Network Company service are decarbonized by 2030. They can do that by either electrifying their full fleet or meeting that obligation with electrifying 90% of their fleet and some other credits that they can achieve by investing in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure or reducing deadheading, which is the time spent traveling between paying passengers. So the TNC world, which is right now dominated by Uber and Lyft, but may include, to some extent, of course, that regulatory structure could expand to include AVs. And of course, there's much more needed to on the you know, on the state agency level to understand how we'll define a future passenger AV vehicles. But turning to privately owned vehicles, that's where we see the policy gap. And there is a bill moving in the state legislature right now, SB 500, that would require that privately owned vehicles, those are not being used in taxi service, to be electrified by 2030 as well. So meaning that they would come to, they would also be electrified at that same timeline, and that makes sense given that that is a gap. One of the things that SB 500 does, however, is it does provide a carve out for heavy cargo vehicles larger than 8,500 pounds. And those are emitted. And because the timeline for electrifying those heavy duty vehicles is longer, you know, even compared to, you know, of course, the broader electrification effort in California will begin in 2035 with, you know, with the governor's recent executive order, which I'm sure the Veloz audience is very well aware of. But, you know, the heavy duty fleets, of course, are going to follow later. So the question, I think, so omitting heavy duty vehicles from from SB 500 was done with that in mind. But it is a little bit ironic because some of the only vehicle that has commercially deployed in California is Nuro, which is a cargo vehicle. I'm not sure if it's under 8,500 pounds, but it is electric. And so I think it is though, because it's a pretty small vehicle, but I think it's important for us to think about what is covered under existing law, what is covered under the existing Clean Mile Standard, and where the gaps are. And the gaps are on privately owned vehicles and on cargo vehicles at this point. So I think that's what we need to focus on it in terms of electrifying the AV space. So I'll pause there, and I'm happy to take questions and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Molly. That was great and extremely thorough. So now let's move into some questions and answers, folks. Let's open up the panel a little bit, and we'll start with our first question to you, Bert. What is Zoox's plan to charge their vehicles? Will autonomous vehicles be able to take advantage of the current public infrastructure, or will a new type of charging be required?
So, you know, as part of a fleet owner and operator in a particular location in a geofence, you know, we do want to build out our own charging and maintenance infrastructure. So we're able to, you know, have that home base where we can clean, service, maintain, and charge the fleet. As we expand over time, you know, we hope to take advantage of public infrastructure. I'd also note, you know, what's really important is a partnership between developers like us, the industry, and utilities, public utilities commissions as well, that help express mandates for developing and building out charging infrastructure. So it's really important. And it also comes down to how you're able to get things done in a particular market, in a particular city, with work on city codes that enable trenching to be able to put power lines in a way that doesn't really disturb a community. So, making sure that they're buried, that you can get enough power to a charging facility is really important. And, we've been encouraged by a lot of conversations that we've had in this space. And I think there's a general recognition that if we are to realize our carbon-free future, then we need to up our game when it comes to developing charging infrastructure as a society on the whole.
Great, that makes perfect sense. Thanks for that. Prashanthi, our question for you is, why did Cruise choose to go electric? Was it part of the overall experience, or was it for ease of use? Talk to us a little bit.
Sure, thanks. Cruise went all electric from the very beginning because, frankly, our planet simply cannot afford to power the future of transportation with technology of the past. It is just not sustainable. We know that electrifying a rideshare vehicle has 3 times the environmental benefits of electrifying a personal car, which is why Cruise is so committed to our future as a shared all-electric renewable powered fleet. And it wasn't a binary choice to go all electric. It's actually foundational to Cruise. An experience that is made by an all electric vehicle in a shared way, it means driving down greenhouse gas emissions, which is extraordinarily important to, I think, all of us here. EV ride sharing, which can have that 3 times environmental impact of electrifying that personal vehicle, means that now we are able to really identify people who can, for everyone who can expand the benefits of clean miles to receive them, regardless of the ability to purchase an EV or access to a charger. So really, Cruise is focused on this shared experience and on improving efficiency and sustainability by also pursuing delivery opportunities to ensure our all-electric vehicles are being used to their full potential. When the pandemic hit, we were able to really partner with SF Marin Food Bank and SF New Deal to deliver meals and groceries all over the 7x7 in San Francisco. And to be clear, every mile that we delivered, over 1.5 bags of meals and groceries, is a clean mile, and it is powered by renewable energy. And so really it is the fiber of which runs through Cruise that electric was founded with us from the start. So thank you for the question.
Of course. To you, Miguel, based on the current testing schedule, when does the DMV expect to see multiple operators of level 5 vehicles on California roads?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's a question best pointed to our manufacturers. Kind of what we're seeing right now is I mentioned that there are 8 companies that have been authorized to test without a safety driver. And those companies are currently testing level 4 technology. So what we're seeing right now is the autonomous vehicles are being tested in specific areas, primarily in the Bay Area, with constraints. So level 4 technology is where the ADS can perform the dynamic driving task, but there are some constraints. So it can't go beyond those particular constraints. When we're talking about level 5, the automated driving system can operate without those constraints. So I think that as we move forward, we're just going to continue to work with the manufacturers, and we look forward to seeing what the future will hold.
Wonderful, thank you. Molly, to you, what are a few things California lawmakers and regulators can do to steer autonomous vehicles towards not just electrification, which you focused on in your earlier remarks, but also equity, mobility, and accessibility goals?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that this is there's no short answer to this. We just published a new paper called the California AV Policy Strategies, which is a top 10 list of what policy strategies we have kind of compiled for the state to consider. They're not at the point of just like recommendations, but there's sort of, a menu of options. If the state would like to pursue to achieve their policy objectives, then these are top 10 options we can do to pursue them. So I'm certainly not going to be able to cover all of them here, but I'll just mention a couple, and then I'll put a link in the chat for the paper. But of course, the top, we've been talking about this for years, the planning world has been pushing for more butts in seats, more occupancy in vehicles, and more pooling to happen across the full transportation sector. So for AVs, that's no different. We want to increase occupancy in vehicles, increase pooling, and there's many ways that they can do that. In the paper that I'll share, we did emphasize this need for at least initially for AV companies to partner with transit agencies, so we can see transit complementary AV service that enables communities to get around and reduces per mile costs for neighborhood circulators, on-demand neighborhood circulators, to encourage people to use that trunk line transit service. Of course, that transit service and making more travel options available is all great, but we do also need that's the carrot, right? But the stick is more pricing incentives and pricing policy. And I mentioned this earlier, but we need road user charges, or which could be vehicle per miles or congestion related. We're familiar with that in our HOT lanes across the state. We need to dynamically price our roadways to address congestion issues now, and of course that will become more important as we automate. And then I think the last couple of things I'll mention is around ADA and disability access. We think of the issues around accessibility and equity are vast, so I can't touch on all of them here, but I will mention that in terms of issues that are important to the AV sector as a whole, capturing, making AVs ADA compliant is part of a shared vision amongst many companies and across the sector, and of course the public sector as well. So we need to think about really how we get there. What does that really look like? And 10% of our state has some mobility disability. Far fewer than that are in wheelchairs, but providing more wheelchair accessible vehicles is extremely important. But the needs of wheelchair riders are diverse. So AV companies need to work with the state and with advocates to address that. And the very last thing I'll say is that is around safety. And this was mentioned before by Miguel, that safety is a federal issue, right? And that there is some action happening on the federal side to address safety and set some stronger safeguards in place. There's also industry safety guidance like UL 4600, which is a consensus standard, but it's really voluntary at this point. And so I think states really do need to step in to set clear safety performance measures, so that we can ensure that that this industry can succeed. A safety issue in the industry would hurt everyone, right? So setting standards, so not only the gold star safety companies are doing really well, but really everyone is set to a minimum set of safety standards and performance standards, and that permits can be contingent on successfully reaching those standards, I think is essential. And if the federal government is being slow to do that, I think it probably will have to fall on the state to set some of those standards. So more to discuss, but I'm sorry to go on, but this is a really important set of issues and much to do.
Thanks, Molly. I know that was a big question, so I really appreciate your answer there. So to Bert and Prashanthi, from a consumer perspective, the public tends to have a lot of questions on safety and reliability. How are you planning on educating the public on the benefit of AVs?
Prashanthi, you want to take this one first and then I can chime in? Or
Sure. Well, I don't think it's only one way and one approach. I think it has to be multifaceted. I think the first is, really, receiving the regulatory permitting, and working with the DMV to assure that we are doing everything in compliance with the regulatory framework and the regulatory environment of the state and market that we're in. And so I think that provides us a solid base to start to be able to provide the assurances to the public and the community that we're able to be on the road. I think testing and safety and deployment all are multi-pillared. There is a facet of the behavior of the vehicle. There's also an understanding of how to work with the various technology within the autonomous vehicle as a consumer. There's an education piece with regards to how to really discuss and talk and contact a remote assistance operator, and how that will, and what unique circumstances that will play into it. And so part of that is really engaging and launching with communities and not at them. And so there is an aspect that we have to do in really, going into these communities, going into constituencies, having working groups, having focus groups, educating them. There's also, of course, just the larger understanding and the research that people like Molly have really been diving into to understand and provide and make it layman's terms for everyone to understand and really be able to comprehend the education that is being sent their way. I think, all of that, we've seen behavioral changes and paradigm shifts over the course of the last decade or so with the future of transportation. We've seen, personal cars, the technology that's kind of shaped by the ADAS, of course, but then we've also seen the advent of the Lyft and Uber world, and the TNC world, where you've seen people start to get into cars and learn how that behavior works. And now we'll start to work with those individuals and understand how that shapes what we can do to provide the assurances that they need to get into the car and to the vehicle and be able to utilize a service like what Cruise is hoping to provide.
Great, and I would agree with all of that. I think education is really crucial, but I think experience also really matters as well. And there's nothing like actually seeing these vehicles on public roadways and being able to get in them and ride in them, and understand that once you're in them for a little bit, you're like, oh, this feels pretty normal. There are going to be just like any kinds of technology, there'll be an adoption curve. Well, there'll be a great group of people who are really excited to be the early adopters, the first users, right? That really sort of, I would love to not have to drive anywhere and just press a button on my phone, have one of these come pick me up where I am, take me to where I want to go, and then go and repeat that over the day and night for others in cities. There are also going to be laggards who are like, there are people who still won't get on the airplane because they're afraid of flying or for a variety of reasons. As a developer in the space, we have to be prepared to engage with everybody on the adoption curve and help meet people where they are as well. And we are still in the very, very early days of this industry, when most of us are still testing the technology on public roads. It has by and large been a pretty good news story in terms of how the testing goes. I think, as Miguel mentioned, every time one of our vehicles gets into crash in California, the DMV requires reporting of that. You can go on the website and see about these crashes. There's annual mileage reporting. We've all, our companies have all sort of grown up around these reporting requirements. But, it is also still the early days. And so, I would not want to necessarily see too many requirements around what kind of technology one must have on the vehicle. I think there's still quite a bit to learn. And I say all this really recognizing that, we're having a conversation about sustainability and the huge sustainability opportunity today for mobility or before us with this technology. But safety's got to be foundational to the industry. And, as developers, as developers of this technology that's being tested on public roads, you can't have a move fast and break things mentality as you're developing this software and hardware together, right? You are another road user, just like another car on the road, pedestrian, cyclist, right? It's and we're not asking, by the way, for cities to take human-driven cars off the road. We expect to operate in that mixed mode environment, and so ensuring that safety is foundational to how we're developing the technology is crucial.
Great, thanks, Bert. And that goes nicely into my next question, which is for you, Miguel. You briefly spoke to the vast reporting that the DMV requires. Does this data show that the autonomous vehicles are more or less safe than traditionally driven human cars?
Well, I think we have to qualify some of the data that's out there. Each one of the manufacturers are focusing on different use cases, and they're testing different things, right? And they're in different environments. So I think it's difficult to take a look at all the data that we have out there. I think while we do publish the data, while we do put this out there for public information, it has to be qualified that each of the manufacturers are kind of working on potentially a different facet or different use case. And so at the department, one of the things we do is we work with those manufacturers to understand, what that use case is, where they're testing, and then kind of evaluate the manufacturer really with the manufacturer, not against others that may be doing completely different things. So, I think that's a difficult question just to say based on all the statistics that we have. We would have to break that down into, we have companies doing robotaxi, as Prashanthi mentioned, they were doing delivery services. There's last mile delivery. There's automated parking features. There's highway driving. There's just a variety of use cases that the technology can be applicable to.
Great, thank you. So Molly, I've got a left field question for you, so get ready for it. We've been talking about passenger vehicles so far, but can you comment on the opportunities for autonomous electric vehicles in the agricultural sector, given that safety concerns are greatly reduced and efficiency/decarbonization gains are much greater? Oh, Molly can't hear you.
Excuse me, it's not my area of expertise at all, so I can't speak to it with any expertise except to say that it sounds promising, and I'll leave it there.
Okay, great. I told you it was a left field question. All right, so for Cruise and Zoox, are you considering fully automated charging similar to tractors at the Port of Long Beach? The vehicle is smart enough to know it needs a charge, so it travels to a location with no human interaction.
I mean, I think what a great idea, right? We, without saying too much, right? Like that is something that we're considering in terms of how we're building out our charging infrastructure.
Great.
Thanks for the question. I think while all electric AVs will have a significant charging demand, needs will be more predictable than personal EVs. And I think because of that, we have a policy opportunity here for cities and fleet operators to partner on charging infrastructure. So Cruise, for example, we will use a blend of private charging depots and satellite charging partnerships with publicly accessible charging providers. So really that will allow a hub and spoke model, which will include AVs returning for maintenance, cleaning, and charging at a central hub. In San Francisco, Cruise owns over 50% of all the DC fast chargers, but we're eager to explore partnerships where we can support hybrid dual use charging stations. So that will be able to operate flexible times for fleet charging, or maybe a mix of public and private chargers sharing at one site, and really allowing greater optionality for the public to charge would be additionally beneficial. But it would also reduce total cost for installation through multiple partners building a site out. So, we are focused on, of course, building our own infrastructure, but we can't do it alone and want to be able to have those public-private partnerships. And hopefully that'll start to change the infrastructure world as we know it.
Awesome. Molly, a question for you. Are there any downsides or unintended consequences with going with autonomous electric rideshare vehicles?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question, because, we don't want to have two, rose-colored glasses view of this, right? Certainly, so I'll mention that, in the ride-hailing world, ride-hailing vehicles are promising to, to really provide people opportunities to downsize the number of cars they own, go car free, right, and provide that option. But there's also concerns that they compete with public transit, and in places, and certainly that really varies in depending on the land use of the area that you're in. In a dense urban place, they actually found there's been some research out of Berkeley elsewhere that says that that TNCs are more competitive in those environments. In lower density areas where there isn't as much transit competition, there's less of a concern. So the same might be true for if 50,000 ride-hailing AVs at very low cost entered a given city with a robust transit network. That could be a challenge for that city, because it could create a lot of congestion, even if those vehicles are shared, because it still isn't as efficient as moving people on a 40 people on a bus. So I think these are the kind of questions that we have to have as companies and regulators and lawmakers together to think through how we make sure we strike a balance, and that transit and that AV service can enter the market in a transit complementary way, in a way that keeps cities moving. So I think that's one thing I'll mention on the downsides, but there probably are others, but that's one thing that comes to mind, top of mind.
Awesome. Thanks, Molly. And our final question for today is again for Cruise and Zoox. So the research is clear, single passenger service will increase VMT. What are you guys doing to boost pooling or sharing of your vehicles? And what policies would you like to see to support sharing and pooling?
You may be able to, I'm sorry, you may be hearing the vacuum in the background, so I'll try to be quick. Part of my house being heated right now. I think it's still very early. We're not offering a service at this stage. I think what Uber and Lyft did with Lyft Line and Uber Pool, where you can incentivize this type of behavior through pricing, is probably the best way to nudge people to pool and share. So we've seen examples of it. I think the government has been trying to encourage carpooling and sharing for decades now, but it will come down to pricing and availability, and how you're doing how you're route planning within each market.
Thanks for the question again, Winnie. I think from Cruise's perspective, we're building a unique vehicle specifically to start to drive, ride sharing. So it's driving down greenhouse gas emissions. We are looking into renewable, being 100% renewable and powered. So a lot of our steps right now are really sort of setting the tone for the future. So we're looking forward to it, and I think we have some really good partners on the call right now. So thanks again for the question.
Wonderful. And with that, I will thank all of our panelists for a wonderful discussion today. Thank you so much for taking all these audience questions. It means so much to us. And I'll invite my colleague Lisa back on the line.
Thanks, Mooney, and thanks everyone for a great discussion. We're just going to close out the webinar with a few updates, kind of what from Veloz and what's coming down the road for us. So with that, just want to mention for anyone who hasn't seen our 40 million reasons to go electric campaign animation, please visit electricforall.org to see the animation and why all Californians have a reason to go electric. Please feel free to share our assets and our animation through your social channels. So we're excited, and we're excited about planning our next campaigns. So more to come down the road on that. And then we just want to share a bit about a new tool that is on our electricforall.org website, our premier electric car shopping website that we hope you've all visited and shared with friends and family, and to help them find an electric car and incentives. But we have also added what's called the Home Charging Advisor, which allows EV drivers to look at all the level 2 home charging equipment available, all the incentives and their zip code. And then we've recently just added what we call the incentive assistant. So now as you are navigating incentives for your home charger, you can apply online through this tool for all the incentives that you are eligible for. So that's exciting, and please visit electricforall.org to learn more about that tool. And then finally, we have a lot of events coming up and a lot of partnerships that we have. So first off, if you haven't visited electricforall.org and signed up for the No Tailpipe, No Problem, I'm Going Electric pledge, we invite you to do that. We also are supporting and partnering with organizations on National Drive Electric Week, California Clean Air Day, with Charge Across Town for ride and drives in San Francisco, Verge 21. And then our next webinar is October 28th called Haul Yes, Electric Pickup Trucks Are Hitting the Road. So you can find out about that webinar and other webinars we're planning at at veloz.org/webinars. So please visit that website to learn about upcoming webinars. And then finally, please stay up to date on all of our activities by joining our EV news list. Just go to Veloz or Electric for All and sign up through our websites. You will get all the latest information and not miss a single event or webinar. So we invite you to do that. And with that, I'd like to thank again Mooney for moderating and all of our great panelists. This was a really interesting conversation. So we look forward to following your technology and your companies and policies and what you're doing. So of course, dog barking. So with that, I will hope you all have a wonderful day and thank you again for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Okay.